Greetings, everyone. Here we are again for another video that's going to do severe damage to my channel, but it has to be done. Since it appears that Globo Homo, our government, has decided that in 2 years' time we're going to have a war with China over Taiwan, I felt like it might be a good idea to try to provide some information on the topic from a neutral perspective. I'm going to try to give it a neutral perspective, and because of that, I'm going to say some things about the communist Chinese that aren't necessarily negative. I know there's a lot of people who get very upset about that, and I'm probably going to lose subscribers, but this is important. I feel like it's important. I'm just going to do it. And I'm going to say some things about Taiwan that are not necessarily complimentary. We have this this Cold War view of what's going on over there was not really true at the time, and it's definitely not true now. The reason I'm doing this is because accurate information on China just doesn't seem to exist, right? Media coverage on China is exceptionally poor. I'll give you an example. I don't know why I'm picking on Tucker Carlson. He's like my favorite journalist, but yeah, almost everything he says just doesn't have a lot of basis in fact, and it's not his fault, right? I mean, he's not an expert. Who is? Are there any experts in government? I don't know if there are. So what? A couple months back in December, there was a fire in Urumqi that killed a lot of people and kicked off a revolution, like a popular revolution across the country. What actually happened is that, about 40 people died in that fire. Okay. The communist, but if you watch the American media, they will say that 19 people died in the fire. Well, how did that happen? Well, Tucker Carlson repeated this also, that 19 people died in the fire. Well, where did he hear it? He heard it from CNN. Where did CNN hear it, right? They heard it from the communist government, right? If you know anything about China, you know that they will always underreport tragedies, casualties. China has a two-tiered media system. There's the local news, and then there's the national news. If something very bad happens, if there's a disaster, then the local media will report accurate numbers, to maintain credibility. Because you're not going to put anything over on the people who actually live there and talk to people. They're going to know. But at the international level, they'll tell a completely different story, which downplays, or they won't talk about it at all, which is much more common. So like Fox News and all those guys, they don't have like an international office in China that I'm aware of. They don't seem to do much investigative reporting. People like Bloomberg and the BBC and CNN, they do, but all their offices are in Shanghai, and not just in Shanghai, in the French Quarter, which is like, oh man. If you go to the French Quarter in Shanghai, you'd think you're in America. It's like wall-to-wall brew pubs, Starbucks everywhere. It's as if Chinese news had or Xinhua had an office in the United States, but they never left Disneyland, It's that level. And they never go into the interior, and they never check things out. They just, whatever people tell them, that's what they report. So information is very bad, right? And the conflict between China and Taiwan, such as there is, does not seem to be very well understood. This is my area of study, expertise, if you will. I've been here for, 31 years, more or less, in China and Taiwan. So I'm going to give you my take. And I can back all this up. It's I'm not going to say anything radical, but it's going to be substantially different from what they say in definitely from like what like Laura Ingraham, like. Rah. Hmm. I'm going to take the position here. I've been watching a lot of people on, like, I don't know what you call this category of journalists. I watch Gonzago Lira, the Duran, Aaron Mate, the Gray Zone, Jimmy Dore, and Tucker Carlson. Those guys, right? Factual news sources, I guess you could say. And most of them seem to be taking the position that that is very much like Ukraine. It's the United States provoked war, and that there's no reason for us to be rivals with the Chinese at all. Basically extrapolating what they know about Russia and kind of like applying it to China, which they seem to know a little bit less about. I'm not going to take this view. I'm going to say that China is not an enemy, but like it's a rival, and it's a rival that people ought to take seriously. Like if you want to know why we should take it seriously, just look at a map, right? They could very easily eclipse us and make us irrelevant if something is not done. Just look at a map. Like, why is the United States a superpower? Why should New York City be the center of finance and the center of fashion and the center of trade? The United States really isn't in the center of anything, right? Like something like 30% of the world's population live in the Americas. Prior to about 500 years ago, all the trade was overland, right? Between China and even as far back as the Roman Empire, right? It was overland because sailing ships were not very good, and because it was pretty safe, like especially during the period of the Mongol Empire, like the Pax Mongolica, where it became very safe to travel overland between China and Europe, and Europeans even sent some people like Marco Polo all the way to China to go check things out. And then that kind of breaks down, and then the Turks kind of take over like the Eastern Mediterranean and make trade very expensive. So the Atlantic people, Atlantic man, the Western Europeans, start sending ships around to get around, this problem, and that makes them the center of trade for the next 500 years. And the United States is kind of like following on that tradition, like an Atlantic power, a sea power, right? Douglas McGregor has also said this, so I feel safe in saying it. The United States is basically a sea power and always has been. And then after World War II, when most of Eurasia was in absolute chaos and cratered, the United States became the world's manufacturer, and New York City became the world's center of trade. See, money follows trade, and innovation follows money. So, if Russia and China and India and all these BRICS countries are successful in creating this Belt and Road, and do you know what this is? It's a high-speed rail line that goes from China all the way to Europe. That's planned, and with Russia's resources and Germany's innovation and China's manufacturing capacity, they could make the United States who needs you? It would make us completely irrelevant. And that's already kind of happened. Well, they can say, well, we're very innovative and we're very clever and we invented rock and roll, and sure, all that's true. But people are going to go where the money is. And you can see this happening already. I know many European engineers who are trained to work on trains and and construction engineers, and they're all here, right? They're living in China, and imparting their expertise to the Chinese. Well, because we don't build high-speed rail in the United States. We're not building airports. We're not building, much of a whole lot except weapons, I guess. But when all the money is is in China and India and Russia and those places, then the innovation is going to go there too. So we're going to lose that edge. Me personally, I don't think the answer is to knock them down, which has been the United States policy since the 1990s. Like, read the manifesto of the PNAC. American foreign policy is adrift. They have to prevent the rise of a rival in Eurasia, and that's kind of what the Gulf War was about. We're going to take over. We're going to seize the resources, and I suspect that was also what ISIS was about, because they had the same territorial goals, to take over snag the oil. But it turns out that most oil isn't in the Persian Gulf anymore. It's a whole bunch of it is in Russia, which is why we're pulling this nonsense with Ukraine and why we're doing this nonsense with Taiwan. The better option is to not to tear other people down, wreck them so we're the only ones left standing, but to build ourselves up. We have natural resources, we have innovation. Bring the manufacturing back to the United States. Reopen the oil industry and the natural gas industry, and things will turn around for us. We'll at least be independent. We won't be subservient to whatever geopolitical rival emerges on the other side of the planet. Because the way things are going, this is to bring it back around. The reason why the Chinese need to be taken as a threat is their version of geopolitical order is with themselves at the center, and everybody else bowing before the emperor. That's the way it always has been for them for thousands of years, and that's what they see as the proper order of things. That everybody acknowledges that China is superior and bring their stuff, and bow before, knock your head on the floor in front of the emperor and all that stuff. And so the United States is going to provoke a conflict with China, and they're going to use Taiwan to do it. And Taiwan, in this case, kind of takes on the same role that Ukraine has, and the similarities go pretty deep. Chinese people do not like it when I say this, or when anybody says this, because not because it's not true, but because they don't like to be compared to anybody else. It's not just this issue, it's every issue. You compare China to anybody else and say, oh, this situation is kind of similar. Like, no, China's not similar to anybody, because they think they're better than us. Most countries, I suppose, believe that that they're best. I guess you have to, that's normal, that's natural to believe you're the best country in the world. There's nothing wrong with that. But for the Chinese, it kind of goes deeper than that. Like, that they're the sons of heaven, and their rightful place is at the top of the world. So, a little bit of history. What is Taiwan, and why is it here? Why does it exist? Is it a country? I don't want to throw my crotch right on the third rail or maybe I do. I don't know. It has to be addressed. I just don't want to make people mad. You're going to be mad. You're going to be mad. We'll just do it. You're going to be mad. Not really. Is Taiwan a part of China? Well, yes. Is it part of the People's Republic of China? No, because there's an ongoing civil war, a civil war that has been going for almost a century. In 4 years, the Chinese Civil War will be 100 years old. Right. It began in 1927. So, some context, some historical context. From the late 19th century through the end of World War II, the Japanese were invading China and absolutely schooling them. Japan had a modernized military. The Chinese were not only behind technologically, but in politically in complete disarray. They were in the middle of a they had fallen apart, right? The Qing dynasty had under pressure had fallen apart into all these different different states, and Sun Yat-sen, who was the first leader of the KMT, institutes the Republic of China, which is what Taiwan is. Taiwan is the Republic of China. It is the former government of not all of China, but big parts of it, because they never conquered the entire thing. This being the 1930s, this is a good part that's going to make you mad, but it's absolutely true. This being the 1930s, there were two ways forward for any country. One was the communist way, and the other one was the ethno-nationalist or fascist. The fascist way. Fascism not yet discredited in the world, and communism also not yet discredited. Still new and apparently doing rather well, or so it would seem, especially in the 1930s. Liberal democracy will not become a thing until after World War II. So in China also, so every country had a communist movement and a fascist movement. Nobody had a liberal democratic movement, except I guess the U.S. Well, the U.S. also had communist and fascist movements, and so the communist movement in China is the CCP, and the fascist movement is the KMT, or the Nationalist Chinese. And I don't mean that in like the way people use fascism now as like a smear, but like, formally, like they wanted to join the Axis powers. They were formally racist, but of course they could not join the Axis because they were at war with Japan, who was already a member. That would have been awkward, right? Have two members of the Axis powers aligned with each other. They did. They made moves to join the Axis. And during the course of the Civil War, China is actually many different ethnicities formally. I think it's like 56 or 54. I think it's 56. Well, why? Because the previous government, the Qing dynasty, was an occupying force, right? They were the Manchurians. They came down and killed everybody, and that's why you see when like in westerns, like in Bonanza, like Hop Sing he's got the front of his head shaved, he's got the long braid in the back. The Manchurians forced all men to do this with their hair, and it was a symbol of their servitude, right? And when people joined the nationalist side, they'd cut off their braid. It was very dramatic, very dramatic show of of defiance, But what can the Qing do at this point? Not much. And so the nationalist government is going to be, an ethno-nationalist government, and they're going to bring the pain to the Manchurians. And they committed many atrocities against the Manchurians. And this is why hardly anybody in China identifies as Manchurian anymore. There used to be something like 60 million of them up in the Northeast. They're all gone now. The language is gone, and nobody identifies. You go up and you ask them, and he's like, wait, you look Manchurian. This is crass, but it bears mentioning that the look that people associate with like what Chinese people look like, with the epicanthic fold, the single eyelid, and the long eyes, and the kind of the flattish face, that is a northern trait. Those people aren't really Han Chinese, right? The Mongolians look like that. The Koreans and the Jurchens. So that's like a northern thing. The Han Chinese are from the south, and they have double eyelids, just like white people, and they're a little bit shorter, right? A little bit darker. So, you go up there and like everybody, not everybody, but a good deal of them they're quite tall and got the got the eyes and the face. And you ask them, oh, are you you must be Manchurian? Like, no, no, Han Chinese. And the reason that is because during this period, there were there was ethnic violence against non-Chinese or non-Han Chinese, but there being so much intermarriage and because there was no real record of who belonged to what group, and because they'd all been very sinicized, and they had to, and they all had taken Chinese surnames, they could just say that they're Chinese, and nobody knows any better. And like my father-in-law we found out recently is Zhuang, which is a kind of Thai that they're from the far, far south. On his ID, his national ID, it says he's Han Chinese. But you look at his birth certificate and it says he's Zhuang, right? Darker. And yeah, this happened everywhere. And the nationalist Chinese, they went and they desecrated Qing cemeteries, and they engaged in quite a bit of ethnic violence. So, the question you ask yourself, this is the part where I'm going to say some things that are not necessarily negative about the communists, because the communists do look better in the Civil War than the nationalists do. You probably know this story, but not from this perspective. The nationalists were always much, much larger, like than the communists, 20-1. Okay, and the nationalists the communists were initially part of, they were members of the Nationalist Party, on an individual basis, the nationalists let communists join the Nationalist Party. And Sun Yat-sen, before he died, we're being invaded by the Japanese. So if you guys, the nationalists and the communists, if you guys could not fight for a minute, let's concentrate on getting the Japanese out of here first, and then we can resolve your differences. And everybody was like, okay, because Sun Yat-sen was like this luminous figure, and everybody thought he was wonderful. Both Taiwan and the CCP claim Sun Yat-sen as their founder, and they have portraits of him. They both do. And then he dies, and then in 1927, the nationalists decide to purge the communists out of the party, and kicking off the White Terror. There's two incidents called the White Terror. This is the first one, where they arrest and, in some cases, assassinated communist members of the KMT. KMT, in case you don't know, is Kuomintang. It's the Nationalist Party. It's no longer the government of Taiwan, but it was for a long time. The flag of Taiwan, the red with the blue and the white star in it, that's a ethno-nationalist flag, and is the flag of the KMT. Right. So this kicks off the Civil War between the communists and the nationalists, and it's a war that the KMT started. Unequivocally, they started it. Okay. So during the course of what we would call World War II, but the Chinese never acknowledged being part of anything called World War II. Like, to them, it's the Civil War and the Japanese invasion. That's how they see it. They don't acknowledge themselves as being part of a larger global conflict. It's just something that different perspective. Well, the United States is financing and funding both sides. United States is at war with Japan, and they are giving money and arms to the KMT, and they're giving money and arms to the CCP, something that most Americans don't know, and most communist Chinese don't know either. Like, we supported them in the war against Japan. Like, doesn't that make us allies? Apparently not. So during the course of the war with Japan, this bears in mind, like the nationalists outnumber the communists 20-1. They have them outgunned, they have them outnumbered, they have much more money. The communists control no land. The nationalists control all the productive parts of the eastern seaboard, like Shanghai and all the good places. But Chiang Kai-shek, who was the generalissimo, the dictator, if you will, the president, though unelected, of the... oh, wait, maybe he was elected. No, subsequent versions, leaders are unelected, but I'm not sure. Right, during the course of this war, the United States is getting very frustrated because they're giving all these arms and equipment to the nationalists in order to fight Japan. But they're not fighting Japan. They're fighting the communists, right? Either they are using the material to fight the communists, or they're holding them in reserve, right? Famously, Chiang Kai-shek said that Japan is the Japanese are a disease of the skin, but the communists are a disease of the heart. Okay, so they're not going to waste any equipment fighting the Japanese, because the Allies are going to take care of them for us, and we're going to keep all this stuff in reserve. And the war is over, we're just going to go ham on the communists and win the Civil War. This attitude eventually causes them to lose the Civil War. And you have to ask yourself, whatever you think about the communists, you have to ask yourself why they were able to win, right? The Chinese peasants, they don't know, the Chinese people, they don't understand any of this, right? Most of them are illiterate. They have no idea what nationalism means or communism means. And the communists really don't bother to explain it either. Like, if you should read like Mao's Little Red Book. Like, what would you expect to be in Mao's Little Red Book? Probably a whole lot of stuff about communism, right? No, it's the Chinese people are great. The Chinese, it's a very nationalist document about how great China is, and how great the communists are for making China great, and everything's great, and it's actually very silly. It's a very childish bit of work, but. Yeah. So while all right, I didn't finish that thought. You have to ask yourself why the communists won, because they started out with nothing. They hold no land. They only have like themselves and guns. And in the meantime, they're being attacked and pursued by the nationalist government of China, and reduced down to like 1,000 people. Like, you may have heard of like the Long March, right? They are driven all the way into the interior, into a place called Yan'an, which is up by Xi'an. It's way up in the desert mountains, and they just kind of hole up there, right? And from nothing, they come and they they take over the entire country. Some Soviet support, I guess, but that's not really the reason. The reason is an epic failure on the part of the KMT. Okay, and the really big incident that causes the KMT to lose the war is the hang on a sec. Is the Battle of Nanjing, or Nanking, as you probably know it. Everybody's heard about the rape of Nanking. Oh, the Japanese, they went in and they massacred more people than even lived there. And it's a terrible thing that live in infamy forever. That's true. What you may not have heard is that Nanking is the capital. Nanjing was the capital of the nationalist government, and the nationalists, when the Japanese were coming, they abandoned the city. They took their army and they left, the they left the city to be massacred by the Japanese. The Japanese, when they invaded Nanjing, were not facing an organized army. They were facing plainclothes militia. So it turned into a Fallujah type situation where, the Japanese couldn't tell who was a combatant and who wasn't. They just start shooting everybody. And they killed a lot of people. And it was at that point that the nationalists lose the Civil War because, it kicks off mass defections. Mass defections within the nationalist army. All these people who thought they were signing up to, defend the homeland against the Japanese invaders. Like to most Chinese, they don't care about this ideological conflict between the nationalists and the communists. They care that they're being invaded by a foreign power. And here is the nationalists abandon the capital city and leave people to be massacred and raped. Like, as you've heard. And yeah, I've talked to people like, I guess they're all dead now, but 20 years ago, like there were still some people who fought in the Civil War, and they just said, I knew a guy who was a skipper on a nationalist destroyer, and man, he was interesting to talk to. He was like, yeah, like after the Nanjing incident, I met with the guys, like, what do you think? And they threw they mutinied, and went over to the communist side, like. We're here to fight Japan, right? I don't care about this ideological stuff. We're here to fight Japan. And so they, the entire Navy, I don't know about the whole Navy, but a lot of the Navy and a lot of military units, they all mutiny. And from that point on, the communists start doing very well. Not necessarily because of something they did. Well, it was perceived that, the communists didn't have much, but with what they had, they were doing active resistance against the Japanese, and the nationalists were not. So mass defections, right? And this causes the nationalists to lose the Civil War and to lose it rapidly. Before World War II is over, I believe the communists were in, control of most of the country. Okay. So then what happens? It turns out that the communists didn't really have, even with like the few ships that defected, they don't have much of a navy, they don't have an air force, they just have peasants with guns, right? Which is very good for taking over land targets, I suppose you could say. Very good at taking over land targets, but they can't project power, across the waters. So the nationalist government, seeing the writing on the wall, they take themselves, their families, and all the money and a whole lot of stuff from the museums. They just they loot. I suppose it's theirs. I don't know if you call it looting, but they take a bunch of stuff and they take it to Taiwan. Which is, by the way, is not the first time that has happened. Taiwan is traditionally a place of refuge where governments who defeated governments would retreat to. During the crisis of the Ming Dynasty, there's some people who flee there. It's kind of like the city of Ravenna, right? When the barbarians were running, going ham all over the city of Rome, they retreated to Ravenna, which I believe is an island. Anyway, it's a place where they can be safe because the barbarians, their horses can't jump across the water. They don't have boats. Korea has an island that's like this too, like right off the coast of Seoul, where they, when people invade, they kind of retreat to. So yeah, and then the United States not really understanding what was going on, who did not understand the Chinese Civil War at all. They park the fleet, the Seventh Fleet, I believe, in the Taiwan Strait and prevent the communists from crossing. And this creates the state, if you will, of Taiwan. So in the eyes of the government of China, this is a civil war that is not over. It is a civil war that the United States has intervened in, and they don't really understand why. If you play Fallout, right? If you know the Fallout lore, Taiwan is the enclave. Like it's like the rump of it's the rump end the rump of the vestigial remains of the government of the United States after all these factions have taken over. Right, and after that, United States kind of sets it up as an ally until Nixon goes and visits China in 1970. I don't remember when. It was when he was vice president, I think. Until then, the KMT, the nationalist government, was considered to be the legitimate government of China. They did not acknowledge the Chinese at all, or the CCP at all. Nixon goes and taking advantage of a rift between like the Soviet Union and the Communist Chinese, they confer the status of true government of China onto the communists, and the KMT like kind of goes into limbo where it's state and not a state. So, right. So not only does China claim Taiwan as part of their territory, Taiwan until recently claimed all of China as their territory. As a matter of fact, this changed, by the way, and I'll get into that when we get into the 1990s. The nationalist Chinese claims were much larger than the communist claims. Jiang Zemin ceded the part of Manchuria that is Vladivostok in the Russian Far East. They ceded that to Russia. China never had any territorial claims over Mongolia, and there are some parts to the far west into the stands into Central Asia that the communist Chinese do not claim, but the nationalist Chinese do, or rather did. Right. So the Taiwanese moved to Taiwan, and they kind of bring their ethno-nationalist stuff with them, right? And they're going to set up a military dictatorship on Taiwan. Like, everybody's like, "Oh, Taiwan, like beacon of democracy." Well, maybe recently, but when they first got there, they had the same kind of government that North Korea had. It was a hereditary dictatorship, basically a monarchy. Rival powers or rival parties were outlawed. I'll tell you a story. When I was there in 1991-92, I was 19 years old, and I was in the city of Yangmei, which is just north of Taichung, I believe. It's a little burg, and I would, had my scooter with the Noriko Sakai like mud flap on the back, and running all over town. I would go up to the next biggest city, to go, play Street Fighter. They had like banks of Street Fighter machines, like all over the place. I would go there and play Street Fighter until the middle of the night, and then I would take my scooter back. And one of the times I'm taking my scooter back, I'm riding back. I run right into the middle of this midnight rally of DPP supporters. Supporters of DPP is the Democratic Progressive Party. They are the current government of Taiwan, but at the time they were illegal. So I run into the middle of these guys, and they had like their green and white flags, and they were holding a rally, and I kind of rode right up into the middle of them, and they wanted to talk to me, and they gave me these flags, these illegal flags, and they taught me all these slogans that you weren't supposed to say. The slogan is Taiwanguk, which is indigenous Taiwanese for the nation of Taiwan. They're an independence movement, and at the time, that was illegal to say. You could not say that Taiwan was a country, right? Kind of like how in China now, you can't say there's only one China. Well, that was their attitude too. There's only one China, and we are it, and we're going to go take all that stuff back. And so, yeah. And then I took all this stuff. I took it back to the office where I worked, and I put the Taiwan. I put the flag on my desk. I had no idea what was going on, and my coworkers were like, "Oh, what's that?" And like I start rattling off all these slogans, like, we're gonna get in so much trouble. Like maybe you shouldn't put that on your desk. What if somebody came in here? Yeah. So the government of Taiwan up until the mid '90s was it was a dictatorship and very authoritarian. They censored the media, they censored the radio, they censored songs, bizarrely. And I had a little mini collection of like this dissident music, like Lo Da Yu and other stuff. Good stuff, by the way. Right, so where was I going with this? In the 90s, under pressure, almost certainly from the United States, the KMT loosens its control and allows other parties to compete in the national elections, and the DPP take over. Right now, what about the DPP? They are, on the one hand, they're an independence movement. I don't know how democratic they actually are. It strikes me that they aren't really. One thing you need to know about Taiwan is that in the first Sino-Japanese War, in about 1890, Japan takes Taiwan away from China, and they set it up as a colony. And like in all their other colonies, such as Korea, they force everybody on the island of Taiwan to speak Japanese, at work and in daily life. And when I was there in the 90s, you had these old people, and I knew a little bit of Japanese, so I was able to converse, freely with them in like what Japanese they remembered from 40 years ago. Since then, and I believe this is encouraged by the United States and also obviously Japan. Taiwan under the DPP is converted into not so much an independence movement, but like into a pro-Japan kind of a party, right? The Japanization has come back and it's popular again. Possibly with the encouragement of the United States, it would make sense. It would follow a pattern. It would follow the pattern that you see in Yugoslavia and in Ukraine, where you promote this movement that is absolutely unacceptable, right, to the regime that you're targeting. Like in Russia, you support the Banderists, and it just makes the Russians apoplectic to have these. Nazis, like actual Nazis, with the people that had killed like 20 million of them in World War II, like right there on their southern border again. Well, it's the same deal with the Chinese and Taiwan. China regards Japan as their main enemy, not the United States. This is important. I've quizzed many people about this, and I don't think they were just telling me what I wanted to hear. Like I used to hang out with a couple of people in the Chinese military who are pretty cool. They're just soldiers. They're not idealistic. They're just doing a job. They're just patriotic. Woo, go China. I said, and they said something like, "Oh, we're all friends here. And like, how can we all be friends if we're enemies? Like, what are you talking about? We're not enemies. Japan is our enemy. Yeah, but blah 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 blah." And they said, "Oh, 你说的是帝国主义," which is a word I had never heard before. 帝国主义 is enemyism, like the theory of enemy, not a real enemy, but like a theoretical enemy. The United States is a theoretical enemy. Our real enemy is Japan. We just, and it seems their attitude is like, we just wish the United States would stop existing, at least get out of our part of the world, not intervene in our politics. Yeah, where was I going with that? Yeah, they regard, they do not regard Taiwan as an enemy. And this is important. like we in the West, we have a civil war and then we hold grudges over the civil war for centuries in some cases. Still mad about the American Civil War, and, you know, bring out the stars and bars and people are like, freak out. There is a genre of fiction, a genre of television in China, and they have it in Korea also, which is the Wars of Japanese Resistance. There are so many of these, and they're very silly. I should review one of them sometime for the channel. It would be very funny. But in these, they minimize the role of the KMT in the war with Japan, and obviously Japan is the main enemy, and Japan is the only enemy, right? The KMT, they're very wishy-washy on what, Taiwan's status is and all this, because they don't want to they don't regard other Chinese. It's not natural for them to see other Chinese as enemies, right? They're misguided, they're manipulated, they're disobedient, but they're not enemies. Japan is the enemy. So to have all these, Chinese people suddenly taking on the identity of Japanese people and like speaking Japanese just drives them berserk. I can't even put it into words. It just makes them freak out. And you see these now that a lot of Chinese people are getting on the public internet, right? You see like arguments between these two factions, and they're just absolutely vicious. Like, how can you, like, these people who they killed millions of us, and now you're speaking their language, and you're being all friendly with Japan. How can you possibly do this? What is the matter with you? You're not really Chinese anymore. Blah blah blah. So, what's my point here? China does not want a war with Taiwan. It really doesn't. It would not be good for them at all. It wouldn't. It would be very difficult for a communist Chinese soldier to pull the trigger on another Chinese person. It would be painful. So the CCP has never really had plans to invade Taiwan. I know they're saying that they do, but it's like a last resort kind of a thing. The Chinese position all along is that they can reabsorb them culturally and economically, right? Interesting fact, interesting point. In the 2008 Olympics, right, which they were very excited to get. What is the point of the Olympics? The point of the Olympics is to show your best face to the world, right? To trade deals, like to raise your prestige. CCP was all in on this, very excited about it. But what did they do with it? Not because they can show like the rest of the world how great they are, but to improve their standing vis-a-vis Hong Kong and Taiwan. And so all the propaganda, or not the propaganda, but all the media that they created surrounding this. There was a big one. This one went triple viral in China. It was a song that they commissioned called "Beijing Huanying Ni," like Beijing welcomes you. It was a pretty good song, casting all these actors and celebrities and cultural luminaries from mainland China, but also Hong Kong and Taiwan, right? Only in Mandarin, never shown outside the world. Like, Beijing welcomes you. Beijing welcomes who? Beijing welcome. This is directed only at Hong Kong and Taiwan. The whole point of their propaganda drive surrounding the Olympics was directed at them. So that's one point. Oh, and there are obviously families on both sides of the strait, right? Similar situation, North and South Korea, or the two Germanys, right? Family on both sides of the wall. They don't want to kill each other. And there's also a good chance that they can, reintegrate along those lines. If the menace of the United States and the menace of Japan is eliminated, then they'll just naturally come back into the fold, so as it were. And there's a lot more economic cooperation going on across the strait than you're probably aware of. I have bad news for you. All those semiconductors and all those electrical components that are made in Taiwan, as it were, I have bad news for you. A lot of that stuff is offshored across the strait into Fujian, the province right across the strait. That's where your electronics are actually coming from. Not all of them, but smaller components and stuff. And another point that bears repeating is I'm loath to blame bad things on communism when it isn't actually the fault of communism, but this actually is the fault of communism. That China does not have a media industry, so to speak. Not because it's suppressed, although it is sometimes suppressed, but it's de-emphasized. Culture is de-emphasized. The part of China that is actually communist is radically materialistic. It is a self-strengthening kind of thing, and they are focused on infrastructure, housing, bridges, airports, railroads, all these things. Everything else takes a back seat. And because they're in control of the economy, like from the top down, they invested nothing, and they make no allowances for creating culture. And because of that, they have a film industry, but it's kind of crap. And even then, they have to get directors from other places, right? All the films, everything cultural in China comes from either Hong Kong or Taiwan. Almost everything. Everything good, at least. There is there's native grown like music, but it's not good. And the films are getting better, but they're all very jingoistic, and it's kind of, not popcorn movies, I guess is what I should say. And 100% of Chinese porn comes from Taiwan, which has to be Japanese influenced, right? Japan has always had has been pretty libertine sexually. China is not like that. They're quite conservative, but Taiwan suddenly in the past half decade has a huge porn industry. And when the China, which has where men can't find wives, it's very. So if China were to invade Taiwan militarily, they would be going to war against all your favorite music stars, all your favorite film stars, and all your favorite porn stars. And that's a tough sell. Right? Nobody wants that. But it looks like the United States is going to provoke some kind of a conflict, which seems to me like a very, very bad idea. And it looks like the way it's going to go is it wouldn't be just the United States fighting the war against China, but I believe they're going to deputize, marshal, rally Japan and Korea to this. The biggest news that nobody reported on is that Japan is remilitarizing. Okay. And Japan may have the largest navy in the entire world. The way Japan's armed forces are organized, formally, because of their constitution, the constitution that we forced on them, they are not allowed to have. They are only allowed a self-defense force, and it is limited in size. So what they do is that their entire self-defense force is officers. Like every single person in the JIDF. No, that's not JIDF. That's something else. The Japanese Defense Force is they're all officers. So when they do have to militarize, they can they have the officer corps in place, and they can conscript, like regular people to be the enlisted men. So Japan has a very large navy, probably larger than China's, and they are remilitarizing now. And the only reason I can think that they would do that is because the United States can encourage them to. Because I keep running into conversations. Like people have a misconception about like Japan's government as well. They think, they believe the propaganda of the CCP and the Koreans who say that Japan is like the terrible militarist government. They do all these things like visit the graves of soldiers who have died, which is a terrible fascist thing. It's all nonsense. Japan has a radically left-wing government. Radically. Nationalist parties, militarist parties are illegal. And every single news outlet in Japan leans strongly left. There was an attempt about 20 years ago to like reinvigorate the Japanese right. And it didn't go very well. One guy I follow, I was into the Japanese right for kind of a long time. I just happen to have these on my desk. Like this is the guy, Kobayashi Yoshinori. He's the only, one of the few people few major figures in Japan that you can call right wing. And under their publishing laws, he's able to publish his like this is Dance in the Desert. It came out in 2003, 2004. I've had this for a very long time. Criticizing the war in the Persian Gulf. Very interesting perspective. I would like to do more on him sometime later. But I've been following him for a while, and he had, in 2003, 2004, he had like a magazine, and he was like a publishing empire, and he was going on talk television, and then he supported the something called the Sankei Shimbun, which was a kind of right wing, but kind of more like in a Breitbart kind of a way, right wing, like North Korea all day, every day. Very jingoistic, kind of silly. I subscribed to it. It wasn't very good, but that went away. These are quite good. They're very good. I learned a lot about the other side of Japanese politics that way. But from that high point, they've been ruthlessly suppressed. He has been. I follow his YouTube channel, and during the course of 2022, his entire YouTube channel was nuked like no less than 2 times. I think maybe 3. And it just happened again. So I had to go find him. Where did you go? And he's got a new channel. It's got like, a couple thousand people on it. So they can't stop him from publishing, but they can, kick him off social media. Why do I make this point? There is no militarist right. There is no serious right-wing or pro-military movement in Japan. The only reason I can imagine that this would be happening now is if the United States encouraged it, and they will also, whatever America-sama says that they will do. So yeah, that's my background information. I don't think we can win the war. I think it will turn out pretty much the same way that the Ukraine-Russia thing turned out. Yeah, I think it's the act of a desperate State Department that knows it's losing in Ukraine, that knows it's losing NATO, that knows it's on its last legs. It seems very desperate to me. And I hope it doesn't happen. And that's my video.